How do I know if I'm helping or hurting my athlete's language development? Welcome back to Translation Timeout. Today, I'm going to answer frequently asked questions about ideal conditions for learning a language. And I'll also give you a handout so that you can reflect on your team's current environment. If you have additional questions at any time, please leave a comment below or email me at translationtimeout@gmail.com. So the first question is, if I'm hiring an English teacher to work with my players, does the teacher need to speak the player's language? This actually isn't necessary. I've taught classes of students where there were 16 different languages spoken and the only one we all had in common was English. And a lot of adult learners will actually specifically request that their teacher does not speak their native language. The reason why this works and why it's so popular is because English teachers have a variety of techniques they can use that work for any student, regardless of their language background or their proficiency level. And we do research our students' languages just to have a sense of what types of challenges they might have in learning English. But for the most part, we work really hard on limiting that dependency on the native language and promoting processing in English. Of course, there are benefits to a bilingual classroom and having a teacher that speaks your language, but one thing that I see a lot is that teachers spend so much time talking about English that students don't actually get a chance to use English. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. I don't think that the ability to speak a student's language makes you automatically a better or worse teacher. Instead, I would focus on things like, are they flexible? Do they work well with the staff and team? And are they experienced in teaching English in context, like for sports or business? Question number 2, should I enforce English only on my team? This is a hard no for me. I think if you have two players who want to speak French to each other, let them do it. Forcing everyone to speak in English all the time is isolating, exhausting. It's a huge confidence killer for the players who don't speak it very well. And if there's any chance that you could use their native language in part of your game strategy, you're throwing that opportunity out the window. There are definitely times where native language support is going to help. Here's an example of some information that I had translated into Czech. It's about how to present yourself in an interview. I could try to simplify this information to match my students' proficiency level, but sometimes some things are just so complicated that if you try to simplify it, you're going to lose the meaning. Instead, embrace that native language you can so that your player has better comprehension. That could mean using a translator for written language or an interpreter for spoken language. Question number 3, can I have my players interpret for each other? I love when players want to help each other out, but I would just be careful about this. One thing that could happen is the player doesn't pick up English as quickly as we hoped, and now the veteran player feels resentful that they have all this extra work to do. So you just introduce some very toxic dynamics onto your team. Another thing that I saw a lot in schools is when children spoke English better than their parents, they'd interpret for them. And now all of a sudden they have access to this very sensitive information that their parents would otherwise protect them from. And so, privacy issues are definitely a concern. Another thing is that maybe your player who's trying to help doesn't understand exactly what you're trying to say, and so they actually interpret incorrectly. You could avoid all of those things by having an objective third-party linguist support you. Question number 4, can I just use Google Translate or ChatGPT to get around paying for a linguist? As someone who worked in the translation industry for several years, I wouldn't recommend this. I've seen the fallout of a lot of bad machine translation, and I think what some people don't realize is that many languages are way more context dependent and nuanced than English, and that is currently still a struggle for large language models. We also don't know what it was trained on, so we could be introducing non-native content or content that's inappropriate for some users. The industry standard is to still have a native speaker review anything that's going to be published. And I think if you're going to take the time to put something in a different language, why not make sure that it's accurate? Another great thing about working with linguists is that they can give you cultural insight. For example, this Czech linguist gave me information on how to lay out my document to make it look like it was written by a native Czech speaker. And that's something that I wouldn't even think to do as an English speaker because there's nothing like that in English that we'd have to do. But it does matter in other languages. It makes you stick out and look like you're not native, that you don't care about your audience. And so that human touch does still matter when it comes to working in other languages. Another question I've been asked is, how come my player took years of English classes and still can't speak with me? That's a fair question. I've been to English classes around the world, and all I can say is that not all education is created equally. In fact, I've met some English teachers who didn't speak enough of the language to be able to have a conversation with me. So that would absolutely affect their students' proficiency. And I've worked with players who traveled all the time for games, so they just missed all their English classes. And most English classes in other countries deal with things like packing a suitcase or going to the grocery store, and that's not going to prepare you for having an in-depth conversation with your coach about improving your form. It can also be difficult for learners to understand some accents, new slang, and on top of that, it's also common for people to just go through what's called a silent period where they are just absorbing as much of the language as they can before they turn around and produce it themselves. So overall, you will need to be a little patient and manage your expectations. Just because someone did take English classes doesn't mean they'll be ready to speak from day one. They may need some extra support. Okay, the last question for today is, why do my players suddenly regress in speaking English? Well, it would be great if language learning was linear growth, but it's not, and it's normal to have setbacks in your language learning journey. One thing to consider is, of course, as an athlete, did they experience any head trauma? If you can rule that out, though, it could be stress. And I'll talk about this more in my videos about interview prep, but stress can absolutely affect your ability to communicate in any language that you know. This is an image showing Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is an educational theory, and the idea is basically that those needs on the bottom, like food, shelter, water, those are things that you should prioritize before you can take care of higher level needs, things like socialization and self-realization. So think about all the stress that a new player could have in a new country. Maybe the food doesn't settle well with them. Maybe they're staying up late to talk to family on the other side of the world, or they feel like they're not fitting in yet. They feel like they're not really playing their best in this new league. Communication in a new language could suffer along with game performance. So you'd want to prioritize understanding the issue they're going through so you can do what you can to help them overcome it. So when we're thinking about the best language learning environment for our players, we want to create a space that's supportive but challenging, inclusive of other languages when needed, and not creating more work for anyone. If you're providing multilingual resources, quality counts, and try to stay aware of things like an athlete's educational background or emotional and physical well-being so you can better manage your communication expectations and better support your players. I've included a link to a PDF in the video description that you can use to reflect on your players' gaps and stressors, how you can help them, and whether your expectations have been realistic. Please reach out if you have any additional questions, and stay tuned for my next video where I'll talk about best practices for an international orientation. Thanks for watching, and see you again soon.